Hello folks, and welcome to Netcruzer RC. I think it's about time I get started on the Tekno RC EB410 build. This is a 1/10 scale 4-wheel drive competition buggy kit, and I've had it since late 2017 and I've yet to build it. Unique things: it has the industry first reverse bell crank steering system, very large shocks for a 10th scale, and it has that unique chassis design where it's very empty in the rear and it's all front biased. Here's some of the tools that they recommend for it. I did show this in a video previously, but hex drivers are standard, nut drivers are standard, hobby knife is standard. I did get a turnbuckle wrench. I did end up picking up the turnbuckle wrench that they recommend, one of them anyway, and I also got this shock tool as well that they also recommend. So I have pretty much everything already that you would need to build it. Here's a bit more about it. These were very hard to find at the end of 2017. My racing sponsor had stock. Grumpy's RC Garage, www.grumpysrcgarage.com. Check them out. They sell a lot of Tekno stuff and they're very good with stock. So they have all the newest kits from Tekno as well as all the parts for Tekno as well. Check them out if you're looking for any Tekno stuff, and they ship from within Canada and within USA. So if you're ordering from US or Canada, you're getting it shipped from within your country, so you never have to deal with the border issues. I did a quick read through the building instructions just to familiar myself with the build, pulled out the sticker sheet, and then the box itself is a standard flip open box, and all the bags were labeled. So this one is bag A, bag D, bag F. So we'll get these all opened up and get the stuff sorted out. There's the body shell. Here's the chassis. Here's all the oils that you get, oils and greases that you get. 500 weight oil, a 7,000 weight oil, and a 15,000 weight oil. First step you start with is the diffs. So we'll be building out the front and rear differentials first. Step one is all bag A, which is build the center differential. So I've got all the parts. You have to grease the outdrive cup, grease the O-rings. I've got it here. It includes the black grease. Some people don't like this stuff, but I'm going to try everything that comes with the kit. So grease that, stick it into this, get the rings done up. It's kind of messy. You start out with messy jobs. Building diffs, you got to use grease and oil and stuff. Anyway, we'll get that going. Something that I find is kind of difficult is getting this pin in, just because there's very little room to play, right? So I like to use a very small clamping. Anyway, I already got it started because I couldn't get it started while on camera. But anyway, you just very small needle nose, and there is enough room to get that in there and get that centered. Anyway, you want to get that centered in between, like so. And then you will drop your gear on. And it just snaps into place. Okay, that's the bottom half of the diff done. And now I can build the spider gears. And for the spiders, it's a composite. And you just put one of these on each side. Oh, with the gear. The gears have to go towards the inside like this. Okay, gears like that, and then you drop it down in, and it has grooves, so you just want to drop it down inside just like that, and now you fill it up with oil. Well, there's your fill level, and then the top gear with the seals. The front and the rear ones will be very similar, so I'm going to build all the diffs and I'll come back to you after all the diffs are done. Alright, I just kept building and I remembered, oh yeah, I was supposed to come back after all the diffs are done. So the center is complete. This is the center differential, it's complete. 15,000 weight fluid in the center, a 15,000 weight in the front diff, and the rear diff is another 15,000 weight. Now I also built the steering assembly, and now I'm on to the bulkhead. So I'm just putting the bearings and the outdrive into the diff assembly now. And here's the diff build. So put the back of the diff on, put the steering links in, put your diff in, grease it up, and then start building the shock towers. Put grease on the teeth, drop that down in. I've already put the bottom on because I had this together once and then I realized I didn't put grease on the teeth. I put it on the can, and you want to have grease on the teeth. And anyway, yeah, then that just spins around and your outdrive's there, and it's 4 screws, easy access, 4 screws. Plunk that on, pop the screws in, and that is the front bulkhead done. This is their reverse bell crank steering system that they have touted as industry first. We'll carry on with bag D, rear bulkhead. Okay, continuing work on the EB410 build. I'm on page 11. This is the front end diff assembly and putting the front arms on. Now, something I wanted to mention was about the hinge pins. They're very tight from the factory, so this arm has almost no play in it whatsoever. Like, it doesn't spin very easily. So what you want to do is pick up an arm reamer. So this is a 3mm Pro arm reamer from Ultimate RC Racing, available from Grumpy's RC Garage, and you just want to put that in through here and just run it back and forth a couple times, and that's all it will take to really free that up. You can feel it almost immediately just take off that little wee bit of material, so that now when you put your hinge pin in, now it's great, right? Now it actually moves the way it should. So that's one I just reamed. This is an example of what that's like reamed versus what it's like without it. You know, that's the hinge moving in between my fingers because there's too much friction. So yeah, you want to definitely want to free that up. Don't do it too much though. You do it on the outer blocks too. It's a worthwhile tip. So I did that on the rear. Here's the rear assembly. Now the rear assembly is very free floating and it'll make the suspension work a lot more efficiently. Here, I just wanted to show this part. Actually, I've found so far the trickiest thing that I've had with this build has been getting that little set screw into the metal wheel hex. Just because it's so easily cross-threaded, you want to be very careful. So it is metal on metal, so they do recommend that you put some thread lock on. Thread lock is included with the kit. So I'm just going to put a little bit of dab of thread lock on here. And then getting this into here, I found that you'll start by feeling it. You'll start to feel it catch and then stop. And you got to really play with it and align it until you get it where it goes in easily, just like that. So it has to be perfectly straight, and it's very easy to cross thread that, so be very careful. Just if you feel it that it's binding up, stop, back it out, you know, go the opposite direction until you feel the threads catch, and then screw it down. I've done 4 of those, and that's been the only thing that's kind of tripped me up a little bit so far with the build. Everything else is going very smooth. Carrying on. Also, for this step H2, pay close attention to how things are oriented. So you're looking for this notch on the pillar, as well as note that the arm is on the higher. This is the higher side of the arm. So you could easily screw this up and put it in the wrong parts the wrong way. So I've just spent some time making sure that this is the proper side. So that to this, and then do the opposite for the other side, which they don't show you in the book. So they don't show you doing the other side. They just show you it once and then obviously figure it out, do the other side with the remaining pieces, but they don't even mention it. Pay close attention to things like when they're offset like this. This is the point of it, is that it's, you know, it's not a symmetrical part, so you have to pay close attention to what part goes on which side of the vehicle. Okay, again with H2, we're still on H2 because it's a fairly critical step, I think, on how your steering works, and it's interesting how all the pieces come together. So there are some unique screws here, and these are the ones that go in the top and the bottom of this C-hub to steering link, and then there's a little set screw that goes in and also ties that together. So that's what these little set screws are, is those tie in through your bearing carrier and lock onto this ring. And it says here to make sure that they're not tight, do not over tighten. Don't over tighten these, but also don't over tighten these, which they don't mention, because as I put it together, if you screw these ones down too much, it really binds up this whole mechanism. You want it so that it can fairly easily move around, and I'm not sure how loose you would want it to be, but this is fairly free-flowing. It doesn't have a lot of friction to it, which is what you would want, but it's also not really loose either. So anyway, just snug up those screws, but do not over tighten them. This was the other thing I wanted to show, is how you know that you've assembled it correctly is they had you make sure that you put in this screw here into this arm. This is what they call the steering limiter, and you know it's correct when it hits on the little spot that they've carved out in the C block. That's where that hits, is right there. They've specifically designed and made sure to call out that you do not skip that step. Apparently it's very important to improving steering consistency. Okay, check this out. This is a nice little touch. I'm putting these ball cups onto the steering arm, and the retaining nut is captured by the arm itself. That's a great idea, because anyway, it just makes building and maintaining it a lot easier when the nut just sits in there and you don't have to hold it with a wrench. So I can just let the arm hold it while I screw down the cup. It's great. All right. Checking in. I am to the point now where I'm ready to bolt the front and the rear end onto the chassis. So here is my rear end that I built first. So the rear end comes together. No problems at all with that. And the same with the front. So here's the front. I've just finished this tonight. The front is all done. You know, one of the most annoying things is building these links. There are tricks, you know, certainly look up instructions about how to more efficiently build the links, and at least they give you a nice scale here of what size you should be building them to. So yeah, those are done, and now we're ready for the chassis. Here is the chassis. Very nice, machined 7000 series aluminum, but it does have a pretty big kick up on the front, and I'm hoping that that lasts okay. I would think that would be a fairly significant weak point. Anyway, so what we do first is front end assembly. I'm on the bag I, and this is the front end. We plunk this onto here, and bumper goes on the front. Bolt the front end on, and then the chassis brace, and then the motor mount. So that's where I am at right now. The only thing so far that I've changed out of the factory is this. This upper screw, based on the reports of running, that is not quite deep enough. And so I did install 20 millimeters. Normally a 15 millimeter screw, it only screws in about halfway back. So the 20 millimeter uses up all of the material here to grab on. So I definitely want to be using a 20. Alright, I now have the front end assembly bolted onto the chassis. So, oops, that looks great. That's my drive shaft falling around there. So the front end assembly is bolted onto the chassis, and that's how the bump screws work. What do they call that? Droop. The droop screws sit underneath the arm there, and that's how you can adjust that. As well as I'm now to the point now where I need to drop the diff in. So here's the drive shaft. So put the drive shaft into the front. For the center differential, the mount that's the outside where it's flat, and then the inside, the bearing sits in there with those holes. I don't know what those holes are for. And we'll drop the center drive shaft in. It's a little hard to get this in. How are you supposed to do that? No, even that. There. It's a little tricky. Hopefully that was in frame. You just have to get it at the right angle, and then it just slips right into place. Center diff is in. Front assembly complete. The brace is curved to support the drive shaft, which is kind of neat. This is the stock center diff cover, which is very wide open and not a whole lot to it. I do have the carbon optional part, but it's tucked away in some other bag, so I'm just going to put this one on for now. And it's interesting how it's keyed, right? It keys into the diff holders. I mean, it's kind of a neat part, but I do have the carbon fiber optional one, which then has a fan which sits over the motor. So I will be using the carbon fiber part after, but I'll put this one on stock for now. Alright, now we're on to mounting the rear on with the structure, as well as you got to choose your mounts for that. And then all these screws go into the bottom, and that'll be the rear assembly going in. These risers, depending on what orientation you put them in, will give you no riser, 1 mil riser, or 2 mil risers, and that's for, there's diff plates you can put under the bottom. So it says look on page 25 for tuning options. If you put in no riser, this would be just your standard stock parts. A 1 mil riser, it's a diff shim you put underneath the rear of the rear end assembly. It says most tuning options with that, and then 2 mil for super smooth tracks, and that's how that works. You would choose one or the other. But those little blocks go into that hole. Hole to the top. The shorter one goes on the right hand side, I guess. Through like that. And then this one goes on like this. And then that should line up, then those holes line up like that. Yep, and then I just got to put a nut on the other end. That's this nut. I didn't realize that this rear brace had tuning options. Tighten that up after, but that's how that works. Okay. So that's ready to go on to the chassis now. Rear drive shaft assembly. Just this little stubby drive shaft is the rear one. And that goes into here. And then I'm going to need to try and line this up. Oh, this needs to go around. It goes around the drive shaft. Oh. So your drive shaft, there, like that. And then get it there. Fall into position. Your drive shaft goes through the chassis brace. Cool. Something to note about these 4 screws for the rear chassis brace is that you it works better if you put a little bit of pressure on, flip the car upside down, and put a little bit of pressure on the chassis to make sure that the holes line up, and then undo the top mount as well, just a little bit to make it so there's a bit more play so you can get these holes lined up. Every chassis is slightly different, but for mine the holes did not line up well. They're like 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter off. So put a little bit of pressure down on the chassis and get the holes lined up and start your screws. Check it out, we have a car, pretty much. Got a front end, a rear end, and a center. And everything's nice and operational. Everything's nice and smooth, actually. Really like it. How the build is coming together. We're to the point now of putting on the shocks. Yeah, so now it's time to start building some shocks.